So we are here. This is 3 Spanish tarts. We will have recipe handouts. Those are already uploaded as well as a copy of this PowerPoint. And then if you guys have any questions that are relevant right at that second that you need, go ahead and put it in the chat room and I will try and pick it up. I don't have a moderator right now, so it might be a little while. Or you can hold them to the end and I'll try and catch everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and start recording now. Okay, there we go. Okay, so let's jump in. So I will, this is 3 Spanish tarts. It is a journey through a translation, redaction, and cooking and virtual taste testing for 3 pies from Libro del Arte de Cocina, which is a 1607 cookbook from Salamanca, Spain. Again, just want to make sure everybody can hear me. We're all clear?
Correct, we could hear you.
So I do apologize in advance here for any cat bombing or photo bombing. This is my sous chef, so he may be jumping in, but hopefully we'll all go smoothly. So this is not about this type of tart. This is a different type of tart. So we will jump right in. So who am I? My name is Caterina Della Zamora. This is me right here with my friend Mistress Claudia Prima when we were doing some open fire cooking a while back. And I have been scrubbing pots and redacting recipes since about the early 80s off and on. So I started in Caid by making marzipan by hand in a meat grinder I got from the Salvation Army. And I love to cook and garden. I like all periods. I like ethnic foods and almost any food, except maybe something like the Icelandic fermented shark. I'm not so keen on that. So what we're going to do is go through 3 recipes from one cookbook, and I will take you through the translation, thoughts about translation, the redaction, cooking, so to speak, and also some tasting notes, so you get a sense of the whole process when you're going through the entire thing all at once. And my philosophy of redaction and cooking development is, I think, yes, you want to follow something, you want something to be period, but you also want it to taste good, be well cooked and well made, and use good quality ingredients. So ideally, it's going to taste great and look good and be period. So you don't necessarily want to dumb it down, but you do want to know your audience. So are they a chicken foot and tripe group where they'll eat anything, or is it more a pizza and burger group, and you may want to adjust accordingly? So the recipes that you get will need some tweaking depending on the source. So I'm not against some modification of steps where it makes sense. Maybe you're using more modern processing or similar cooking methods. But the question also is, are you entering a contest or are you just trying to feed 100 people? So you would use different processes based on that. So look at your recipe. You want to try and figure out what it's telling you to do. You may need to reorder some of the sequence or clarify it if necessary. You may want to look for things that are similar in period, in later period, or even modern/ethnic parallels for cooking times and temperatures and durations and proportions. And then you want to test. And then you'll probably want to test again. So let's take a trip and see where we are going. So this is, let me let someone in here. This is Salamanca, Spain. And this is going to be sort of the Twitter history of Salamanca in a nutshell. So this is in western Spain in the autonomous community of Castilla and Leon. It's on the Tormes River, which is a Douro tributary. So that's basically just about 50 miles east of what is modern day Portugal and about 120 miles west of Madrid. So you may have influences from Portugal more likely than those from Madrid coming into this area. It was originally founded by a Celtic tribe, then it was conquered by Carthaginians, then the Romans, then just a whole slew of other people. And one of the key people that came in were the Moors, who came in 712 AD. Of course, they came into all of Spain. And it wasn't until 1000 AD that the Moors were ousted. So there's a very heavy influence across all of Spain of this Moorish invasion. And along with that, they brought things like sugar and oranges and lemons that were part of the Arabic um, repertoire and ingredients. So that is sort of an overlay on what happens in Spain. Now, the place that this cookbook comes from is the University of Salamanca, which was founded in 1134. So it's one of the oldest in Europe. And its heyday was about the 16th century, where it had 6,500 students and about 2,400 people in the city. So if you ever have a chance to go to Salamanca, I would definitely say take a trip. It's a great city. It's got a lot of just this wonderful Baroque and Gothic architecture. It is a city that is still very much a foodie city. They are known for especially these jamón ibéricos, the cured ham that's very similar to a Italian prosciutto. But they have all kinds of charcuterie across the area. Let me let somebody else in. And they have this wonderful typeface. Also, you see that at the bottom of the slide, that's Universidad de Salamanca Olario. They have this wonderful typeface all around a lot of the buildings in the old town. So it's really a beautiful old town to look at. And when I was there, I loved this poster that says, La comida es como vestirme, me gusta algo diferente cada día, which basically translates as, food is like dressing myself. I like something different every day. So that gives you a sense of what the city is like now. So this is the cookbook that we'll be dealing with. It's a 1607, published in 1607 cookbook, as I said. And the intro on the front cover says, en el cual se contiene el modo de guisar, de comer en cualquier tiempo, ansi de carne, como de pescado, ansi de pasteles, tortas y salsas, conservas, como de cosuras. Let me try and up my volume here if I can. Is that better, guys? Okay. I will try and talk louder. Let me see. Is that a little bit better? Test. Okay. All right. Okay. Is this better, guys? I'll just speak more loudly. How's that? Okay. En el cual se contiene el modo de guisar, de comer en cualquier tiempo, ansi de carne como de pescado, ansi de pasteles, tortas y salsas conservas como de cosuras y de principios y postres a la bianca español de nuestro tiempo, compuesto por Domenico Hernández de Maceras, cocinero en el Colegio Mayor de Oviedo de la ciudad de Salamanca. Okay, so basically this is telling you it's a way to cook just about any food, like meat, fish, pies, cakes, sauces, etc., in the method of Spain for our time, i.e. tail end of the 1500s, early 1600s. So it's just at the late end of period. Sorry, let me go back there. And this reproduction actually is available on Amazon. It's about $20, but it is all in Spanish. So how did we go from this to this? So the school is this Colegio Mayor de Oviedo, which is the fourth and last major college at the University of Salamanca. It was found, that particular section was founded in 1521 by a bishop of Oviedo, which is hence the name. And the project itself dates back to 1998. So the original translation was an unpublished manuscript by Dan Gillespie. And I worked with Dan because he was looking for other translators to review it. I retranslated the whole book, reviewed his translation, and then verified and made some recommendations to the translation. So these were all redactions that follow that I've done to this cookbook. Okay, so let's go to the tarts. And since life is uncertain, let's start with dessert. So here is the first recipe. So these are all in chapters. It's chapter 79 concerning a marzipan pie. It says, hace de majar una libra de almendras y una libra de azúcar. Después de mondadas las almendras y estando bien majados el azúcar y bien hecho el mazapán, échale 8 huevos, los 6 en el mazapán y desatalo con ellos. Y si estuve espeso, échale un poco vino blanco y agua. Y después de echarle masa bien fina, pondrásela a cocer a poca lumbre debajo de encima y al medio cocer batirás un par de huevos y untarla con unas plumas muy bien y échale mucho azúcar y no se queme con el azúcar y huevos y sírvela con azúcar y canela por encima. Okay, so what the heck does that mean? Here's what it means. So some of these words are subjunctive, if you would like. Si estuviera, pondrase, imperative. When you're dealing with translations, you want to kind of start with what is literal. You may have missing words or weird punctuation. You may be dealing with idioms, that is, sayings or very specific things of the day that may not translate well for you. Text may be out of order, things may be missing, letters may be missing. So for instance, in mondada, the N is missing. And the spellings and accents may be different and vary both throughout the document and from modern Spanish. So if you're familiar with modern Spanish, seis, for instance, is S-E-I-S, whereas here it's S-E-Y-S. Azúcar here has the cedilla C instead of the Z, which it has in modern times. So just take your first go going through it to see what your best guess of translating it is. Now, I knew I threw a wall of words at you, but let's take a step back and we will dive in and figure out what all of this means and how we make it happen. So, when we look at the translation, the question becomes, what can we figure out from this? So one thing we can figure out is that the almonds and the sugar are at a 1-to-1 proportion. So at 1 pound, we're using 6 eggs in the dough. And then it says to set aside another 2 to glaze the tart. So the eggs are probably more like a small modern egg because the chickens that they had back then weren't as large, generally speaking, as what we would have now, where they're grown with hormones or really bred to produce very large meat and large eggs. We know that it's baked, but because it's sort of a cake, it's probably not a very hot oven. And other things we can surmise, looking at these ingredients, this is very similar to a modern torta de Santiago, which is a Galician almond cake. So we can look at some of the modern variants to guesstimate baking times, temps, and proportions, we also know it's going to be a bit sticky because it's got a high sugar content. So we're going to have to make sure it doesn't glue to the pan. And it may be a bit bland for modern taste because there isn't any vanilla or any extract in this. So as you're going through this and trying to figure out your redaction, you want to draw on your knowledge of what are period ingredients, what is New World versus Old World. You may want to go look at food history source books, what was grown there, what was available at the time, how were things presented. You want to watch for idiomatic words like corn in, European recipes, which may refer to any kind of grain. Um, if you're dealing with medieval or Middle English, you may want to use a glossary to figure out what your terms are. And then also incorporate your thought process of cooking techniques. So, how would this be made? How would an ingredient react? How long and at what temperature would this be cooked? Also think about, do you know anything about the weights of the time? Their pound may not be the same as our modern pound. And we'll touch on more of this later. And then other things to think about are, what are some similar traditional ethnic or derivative foods that you might be able to look at to help you decipher what's going on in here. Now, I'm not saying necessarily go to a modern equivalent and make that, but I am saying when you look at some of these traditional foods, you can sometimes see vestiges of earlier recipes, and that's a good way to start to decipher what's going on. So we've got a couple of weird things in here. So one of it says, when it is half cooked, beat a pair of eggs and anoint it very well with some feathers and cast a lot of sugar and do not burn it with the sugar and eggs. But it's like, well, wait a minute. I don't want feathers in my food. So what's going on here? And so here's where you would draw on your food knowledge. This is probably what's going on. They're probably using what is still used today, which is a traditional goose feather brush or something similar with feathers, which is perfect for an egg wash glaze. And they're probably doing this when it's half cooked so that it's not burning the sugar onto the cake. So they're pulling it out when it's partway done and then just putting it in that way. So let's break it down. So I worked out the recipe. Here's what I took. I took 8 ounces of blanched almonds, 8 ounces of sugar, so I'm using equal proportions. I chose to add some grated orange peel into this because I knew that would help with adding a little bit of flavor. Then I've got 3 eggs beaten. I've got my 1 egg that I've held out separately. I'm using a lower proportion of eggs because I'm using modern eggs. And then water or sweet wine. And I use demerara sugar, or you can use regular sugar for the topping, just because it's a coarser sugar and more of a finishing sugar. So I use that for visual effects. And then I knew I wanted to this is interesting. Someone's saying 10 o'clock will resume in 5 minutes. Go ahead and hop into those breakout rooms. Not sure what's going on there.
The keynote speech ran over time, so they were trying to push the 10 a.m. classes to start at 10:30 and shorten the lunch break from 60 to 30 minutes. But you're already well underway, so just keep going.
I will keep going. All righty. Thank you so much. Okay. So here's the worked out recipe. And again, all of these will be available for download at the end, so you will have copies of these. And this is about half what was in the original, just because I didn't want to have a ton of it if it didn't work out. So as I started processing, I ground the almonds. I decided to use smaller tart pans rather than make one big one. And I prepped those pans very well so that we didn't end up with a lot of sticky stuff on it. And I ground the almonds gradually so I didn't get almond butter. And then they also talk about sugar. So a friend of mine had gifted me one of these big sugar cones that was typically how this was done in period. And so I had this wonderful cone of sugar. It's like, well, this is the perfect opportunity to use this. Let me make sure I can use it. And then as I started, it was like, well, this is really, really hard. And historically, they would have had something like this. Either this lion in the upper left is actually, that's the bottom of it, just below it. It's actually a grater. So you would hold on to the lion as a handle and use that grater on the bottom, or there are also these on the right are sugar snips that would allow you to break off a chunk of that sugar and be able to then put it in a mortar and pestle and grind it up. So I didn't have any of these, but I did have a different tool. I had a spouse. So
We're going to do 9 to 10. No, 10 to 11. My class is on. I have another class for an hour.
Okay. Yeah, if I'm trying to talk as loudly as I can, I'm sorry that it's hard to hear. But this is basically what we had to do. So is a lot of work. So about 15 minutes later, we had enough sugar to move forward with a recipe. So at that point in time, I reprocessed the sugars and the almonds together to make it finer. So I would have a finer finish to the cake. And I processed that a little bit at a time, added the lemon peel, added the eggs, put them into the pan, and put it in about 350 for 25 minutes, which is a good cake baking temperature. And then about halfway through, removed it, as they said, glazed it with the egg, sprinkled it with sugar, and baked it about another 10 minutes. And this is what it looks like. And so they came out very well. There was a little bit of loft, a little bit of lift, and it's got a not really nice, delicate almond flavor. It's almost chewy in texture, and it's like an almond macaroon. So it's a really nice little dessert. It's fairly easy to make, and it's a wonderful way to dive in and try out this cookbook. Okay, so what is next? The next one I'm going to take you into is a borage pie. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the Spanish. You've got the drill now, but let's look at how that translates. So I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to read that. And then don't worry, it won't disappear. You know the drill now. So let's look at this. So some of this is a little mystifying. So we've got an azumbre. So an azumbre, now I'm going and doing my research. Borage leaves. I'll get there just a second. I'm seeing the chat here. So an azumbre is an old Spanish measurement, and there's a website, convertme.com, that has a great listing of all kinds of different measurements over time. So it's a wonderful resource for you if you're looking for some of these terms that are showing up in the recipes. Borage, if you've ever grown borage, it is a prickly leaf. So it's got a whole bunch of little hairs on it. So if you're picking it, you kind of want to use gloves, but you could use any type of leaf. You can use a young leaf or an old leaf, but because you're blanching it, you're basically cooking it, you don't have to worry about those prickly leaves. It isn't saying flowers, so my assumption on this is you are just using the leaf. And then also just measuring out, you can figure out how much the sugar is. And then when you look at your proportions again that are in the recipe, you've got 1 quart to 6 eggs, which is pretty much a standard quiche recipe. So we're thinking this probably is going to be some kind of baked custard similar to a quiche. It's got a crap ton of sugar in it. So if you really want to follow this and try it just as it comes across, you can do that. I decided to dial down the sugar because I didn't want this super sweet dessert. And then it doesn't appear to be a tart with a top crust. It's just dressed with that sugar, but otherwise it looks pretty straightforward. So everything seems to make sense except that amount of sugar. So here is what I worked out. Now the dough, I had to make a choice. Did I want to do a standing crust pie that was something that maybe wasn't edible but would be a really rigid pie crust? Or did I want to make a crust that was going to be edible? And I opted to make a crust that was more edible. So I researched different types of crusts that were modern proportions and then used that. So that's how I developed this dough recipe. And then I used a mixture of a bit of all-purpose with some rye, spelt, and whole wheat to get away from just a white bolted flour. So something that would have more of the whole grain in it, more of the types of flours that might have been around back then. And then for the filling, I ended up using actually chard for the filling because that was what was growing in my yard at the time. I have grown borage. I didn't have any at the time. But basically, they are using greens. Then you can use milk or half and half, a bit of cream. You want enough fat that it's nice and rich, and the eggs. So here's the process. One thing I wanted to think about, how am I going to get this out of the pan? So I ended up using a springform pan, which is very easy then to extract. I chopped and cooked my greens, which you can see there are my Swiss chard. And then I also pre-baked, blind baked my crust. Now, this obviously is a modern method and my interpretation of how to do it. You wouldn't have to do it that way. It certainly wasn't in the recipe, but it does keep it from getting as gummy. And I wanted something that wouldn't be as soggy. And then another thing you want to make sure you do, you're blanching your greens, whether you're using borage or an alternative, you really want to just squeeze the crap out of those greens when they're cooked so you're not getting extra water in it. And make sure that it's not diluting your mixture. So this is how it came out. And you'll see by sprinkling the sugar on top of it, it gives it a really nice, almost a brulee type crust. And it's a really nice counterpoint to the softness of that quiche. So you can make this any way you want. I did also, because I was using a springform pan, I ended up lining my cookie sheet with foil because I didn't want a peeing pan and be scrubbing my oven. But that's how it came out. It's a really nice dish. It was good hot. It was also good cold. It would be good to take to events. It's a wonderful little tart. Okay, so we're going to cover one more. I will not drive you crazy by reading this whole thing. As I said, it will be in the handout, and we'll take a look at the breakdown of it in just a little bit. So let's go straight to the translation. And there's a little bit of weirdness going on here in the recipe because you're getting two dueling versions of crusts within one recipe. So it's a little bit confusing, but you know how we do this now. So let's take a look. Here's our translation. And what we can theorize from this or derive from this is we're making some kind of double crusted pie. It's an empanada or a pie with a top crust to it. And because we're crusting it and it's going to be self-standing, well, we want to make sure that meat is chopped fairly well or it's going to be all lumpy when we put the second crust on and the meat bits will push through the crust. So we want to make sure that we chop our meat fairly fine. Another thing that's referred to in this recipe is a maraveda. A maraveda is a type of coin, and this coin exists over quite a long period of time in Spain. So we don't know if this refers to the unit of weight or the value of it in terms of spices. We just don't know. So you certainly could go ahead and dive in and try and go down that rabbit hole of what is a maraveda, what was the weight of a maraveda, how much might a maraveda have purchased in spices if you want to. I just took it at surface value, said, I think this is about a weight worth and or proportional spicing to my taste. So that's how I decided on the proportion of spice. And the other thing, as I said, is at the end of this, there's sort of another add-on set of instructions that doesn't quite match. So I had to make a choice as to how I was actually going to do this. So here is what I ended up doing. And this was my test. So I took a leg of lamb, some bacon, some parsley, some mint, salt, verjuice. I ended up using for my maravillas worth about a half a teaspoon each of cloves, nutmeg, ginger, and cinnamon, coarse ground pepper, and then I mixed it together to hold a unit, a disc, and I did chill that because I wanted it to be a nice, well-formed, solid piece that I would be able to then cover with a crust. And then these are your other ingredients that you want to have ready as you assemble it. For the dough, again, this is one that I just created based on proportions that I knew would work. I used all-purpose and whole wheat, a little bit of sugar in it, lard, and egg because I wanted a dough that would be very durable because this is a self-standing pie, and mixed it together. And I did also chill this so that I could roll it out more easily. Now this quantity is smaller than the original because again, this is my test. I want to make sure that it's going to work. I don't want to make a whole bunch of it and then find out, hey, I'm not so keen on this. And so this is assembling it. What I did also is I brushed the raw dough with egg white, beaten egg white, before I put the meat on to keep it from leaking into the crust too much and making it soggy. Then I folded it over, made a venting hole, and decorated it with some cutouts. And it also did refer to egg yolks in the original, decorating the top, cooked egg yolks. And at the time I was pulling this together, I just kind of had a brain fart and just went with a hard-boiled egg, not realizing it didn't call for the white, but it worked out pretty well anyway. So that is how it ended up. So are there any questions? I know this has been a little tough to hear, but I would love to open this up, and I will stop sharing and hope that we can go to some Q&A. Okay. Can you guys hear me? And do you have any questions?
Hi, Katerina.
Hi.
This is Juana from the West.
Okay.
I do a lot of late period Spanish stuff too. There's a really good crust recipe in Diego Granado.
Okay.
And I don't have it right now because I'm eating breakfast, but I will post that somewhere in the Culinary Symposium stuff later. If you're not already familiar with it.
Great, thank you.
It tastes good and is easy to work with.
Perfect. Any other questions? And they all tasted really good, by the way.
They looked yummy.
They were good. They were good.
And now I know what to do with the borage that I can get at the farmer's market.
Well, you know what? I actually put this in the recipe that I wrote up. The borage, too, if you can get the flowers, they're very fragile, but they're beautiful little purple five-pointed flowers. And they show up in a lot of the manuscripts as well, but they're edible. So you can put them in
Yes.
salads, you can candy them, and you could even garnish the tart with those on top.
Yeah, the farmer's market that I go to where they have the borage, it's leaves and flowers all together.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And actually, also, if you grow, what season did I make it? I actually made this in February, which is why I didn't have any borage. I had pulled it out for the summer because if you ever grow it, you know that it reseeds like a madman. And so before you know it, you have borage all over the place. And I was changing my beds out. So that's why I didn't have any borage at the time. Otherwise, I would have done that. Instead, I had just a crap ton of chard. So it became chard. The recipes are all in the handouts, and I also put the PowerPoint up as well, so you can see that they're both up in PDF form on the Google Docs that they have. You're welcome, guys. Anything else? Okay, go forth and cook well. Take care.